All right, there we go. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Today, our topic is talking to our teens about sex and consent. And before I turn it over to Kayla Marshall, she has a presentation for us. I wanted to kind of explain, and I don't know if I've really explained this to parents before, and how I choose the topics that we should talk about every week. I pretty much go through and I think about myself as a parent and what I feel like I need support with. And then I assume that other parents are in the same boat and would like some support with that topic. That's pretty much how I come up with these topics. And the topic of sex and consent, I'm going to be completely honest, have not talked to my son about it. He's 13. I had told my husband, like, hey, he's a boy, I think you should do that. I don't think my husband has done it. I'm really starting to doubt he ever will. So I think it's actually going to fall on me. I did have the sex talk with my daughter. It made me very sweaty. I had to have a glass of wine with me. But I never talked to her about consent. And now she's almost 20. She has shared with me some things that have happened to her in her teen years that I really wish I had talked to her about consent. It's something that I regret. And so learn from my mistakes. That this is a very, very important topic. So our social worker, Kayla Marshall, has a presentation for us today. She's going to lead us in this and give us some tips. Our other social worker, Yvonne Gunter, just joined. So she can maybe talk about how she's talked about this with her kids. And so hopefully we are all free to share today. This is one of those topics that don't really, a lot of us grew up that this is a topic you don't talk about in polite company, so to speak. But I think it's really important for us to tear down those walls of being uncomfortable with this subject, because it's a really, really important subject. Okay, Kayla.
All right. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Kayla Marshall. I'm one of the school social workers. I'm going to be honest, this was a little bit nerve-wracking for me to put together, just because, one, I'm not a parent, so I don't know how nerve-wracking that conversation could be with your children. I think I'm one of younger staff, so I do have more rapport with students just in that way. So my comfort level is, I feel pretty good about talking with friends, and I'm going to treat you all like my friends today so that we can, I don't know, just share kind of non-judgmentally. I have a lot in here, especially kind of breaking it down by age. So I want everyone to know, there's no judgment if you've never had this conversation before, if you're scared out of your mind to have this conversation, no judgment, no shame. But yeah, we'll get started. Let me see how to share my screen. I feel like every time I do a Zoom presentation, I'm relearning how to use a computer. Okay. I can put together some slides though. So when I first thought about how I was going to put this together, I asked a couple of staff members here, what would they want to hear from a school social worker about this topic? And basically, in more kind words, they said, I would not want to hear about this from my school social worker. Not because they don't want to learn about it or that they don't want to talk about it with their kids, just because it's not a comfortable topic, So that's kind of where we're starting, is that it's not the most comfortable conversation you'll ever have with your children. It's probably not the most comfortable conversation to have with a school staff member. Regardless, I'm happy that everyone showed up today. I'm happy to talk about it because it is important. In the same vein, I was talking with my family. I went out to brunch with my grandparents this weekend, and I told them, this is kind of what's on my plate this week for work. I'm a little, kind of figuring out what to talk about. My grandpa just flat out said, why do we need this? Everyone got along fine without this, for many years. And that was just a good reminder to me of not a lot of people got along fine. There's always people kind of struggling with talking about sex with their family, or maybe they're already sexually active and need help with something, or maybe something along the lines of consent and their boundaries have been crossed, and how to talk about it with family, who is usually their main support people. So that was just a good reminder for me that it's an important topic. And while we think that they know all the things and that we assume that they can talk to us about anything, they always need to hear it straight from the horse's mouth that they can talk to you about anything. So I just kind of want to start. I'm not tech savvy enough to put up a Zoom poll, but just either in the chat or if you want to unmute yourself, I kind of wanted to gauge how many people have already talked with their kids about sex or consent or consent, just to kind of hear from you. Maybe, that is a big spectrum. We're going to talk about kind of what is included in that conversation, but I kind of wanted to hear if people have already had that conversation. If you have, what age did you start that conversation? Were they 3 to 5? Were they like elementary school age? Were they kind of middle school or even high school? Maybe Ginny, you'd be able to help. I don't think I can see the chat.
I've got the chat. Nobody's put anything in there yet. But I would say, with me, I feel like with my daughter, I had this conversation in kind of like 2 stages. Like you have the birds and the bees talk with like puberty and everything. And I would say with my daughter, I think she was about 9. Actually, it came up as a Facebook memory, because I had posted something at the time when we talked about it, because when like she was asking questions about how babies were made, and I had to like explain like how sex works and like where the penis goes and everything, and like her reaction was like, oh, ew, and it was hysterical. Like it cracks me up. Her reaction was just like, ew, that's so gross. So she was about 9 when we had like the birds and the bees talks. But actually talking about sex with her, I waited for her. I kept, like trying to make it clear because my mom never talked to me about this. And so it was really important to me that I would be really open with my child about sex. Because I struggled my own self as a teenager with this, with my mom I never feeling like I could talk to my mom about this. But I didn't bring it up. I waited and waited for her to come to me. And I had assumed that she waited and when like came to me when she was ready to have sex and was thinking about having sex. I found out a couple years later she had already had sex when she came to me. And so it was kind of like, again, parents like learn from my mistakes. I feel like I should have done it sooner. So some stuff that's coming in the chat we've got not yet. I started the conversation in middle school. Not an official conversation, but always talked about it openly since they were like 5. Another parent says elementary school. Another parent says age 13, kind of talked about it. One parent says no and haven't even thought about it until today. Another parent says we've not talked about this topic at home at all. My daughter is 17 and 15. So there's a wide range. Some parents have talked about it. Some have like sort of talked about it and some haven't talked about it at all.
Right. That is a wide range. That's across the board. And I think everyone shares a little differently. Oh, I see. Started a conversation. I found the chat, by the way. Started a conversation in middle school, seriously talking about puberty, explaining the risk, responsibilities. Yeah. There's so many different factors in the conversation, big umbrella of sex and consent. Everything can be talked about in age appropriate ways. Of course, comfort always plays a big factor. Yeah, I could talk about my mom. I think she was pretty open with me. In middle school, she was talking about, similar to what you were saying, Ginny, when you're ready to have sex, like we'll put you on birth control. And I think I was scared out of my mind, so that I never even talked to her about it. As open as she was, I was still terrified of the conversation myself as a kid. Of course, that might look a little different later when I have my own kids. But yeah, just just to really bring in the notion, like there's no shame, because we're all kind of working through the taboo, the like social taboo of not talking about this, talking about it with friends, family, our kids, etc. Let's see. Okay. So what, like I've been saying, when we talk about sex and consent, it's not just about the act of sex or like sexual intercourse. We're also talking about their anatomy. These will come into play at different times in the conversation. So when they're younger or older, like sexual activity would be kind of an older conversation, intimate relationships, what it looks like to have intimate relationships, contraception. I don't know if everybody knew this, but in California, if you're 12 years old or over, you're able to consent for your own contraception. So I think that's an even better reason for parents to be involved, to have these conversations, so that students know that they don't have to go do that on their own. They have that legal ability to, but we would always want parents to kind of be involved and know what's happening with their children. The conversation should include sexually transmitted infections. Maybe you also know sexually transmitted diseases. I think the verbiage kind of changed because most infections are curable. There's only few that people live with for a lifetime. This would include pregnancy. Again, not the most comfortable conversation. I think many families might be surprised to know. I don't know, Yvonne, if you've been asked this, but I've been asked if I could provide plan B for students. Students have asked me that. We don't. I want to clarify, we don't. But again, like I said, when they're over the age of 12, they're able to consent to that themselves. So we want to be able to have parents involved in the conversation already, so that they can talk to you about it and they can talk to their doctor about it. Consent as a whole, this is a conversation that is ongoing from a young age, and we can talk about that a little bit more. Masturbation, that's kind of like the even more taboo kind of subject, I think, sometimes, under the big umbrella of sex and consent. Same with pornography. Let's see, sexual orientation, that includes like gender identity. And we'll have a separate presentation that I'll also be doing about sexual orientation, gender identity. That's in a couple weeks. Right?
Yeah, it's in April.
April. Okay, sounds good. All right, so breaking it down, conversation by age. Actually, I'm going to scoot back for a second. Just because like this is a broad range of topics that falls under when we're talking about sex and consent. And everything we talk about can be broken down in different ways to be age appropriate. Of course, we would want to introduce them like when we think our child's mature enough to, have that conversation, or like maybe they're exposed to it already. And I would feel like this is maybe controversial if you think that your child might be getting close to being ready to have this conversation. It's possible that that's already too late. Because what they're exposed to in school and with friends and even just surrounding life right now, they're exposed to things a lot earlier. Things that we may have never crossed our paths without social media when we were younger. Different generations have different exposure to those things. And I always like to say, if they're not learning it from, trusted adults, staff, teachers, parents, anything like that, they're definitely learning about it through their friends, and they're probably not learning the correct things. There's a lot of fun theories out there about contraception that are definitely not true. A lot of incorrect assumptions, I would say. All right, I want to break it down by age a little bit. And I know, right, we work for a high school. Most of your kids are in high school right now, but you probably have other kids in the home, maybe it's possible. But what this would look like at a young age. So if they are under 5 years old, the conversation could be started around autonomy and around bodily consent. So while they're not ready to talk about sex and sexuality, sexual orientation, all that stuff, It is a great time to talk about body parts and body autonomy. Using the anatomically correct terms to describe body parts is really helpful. This helps for them to notify you if something's wrong, in the correct way, and be able to communicate it to you correctly. Oops, I keep pressing the wrong button. So I showed my friends this presentation before I presented to you, and they all laughed at this line, but I thought it was kind of funny, just like reincorporating the term vulva, the term vagina and penis. So hello, vagina and penis, goodbye, PP, or down there, or I know there's a lot of other, like chocho is used like in Spanish in my house to describe like genitals. But again, if there is any kind of health concern or just anything of that nature, we want to help them identify the correct way to discuss those things, which I might acknowledge sounds a little scary. If they're under 5 years old, that might sound really young to have this conversation. But again, we're not talking about sexual intercourse with 5-year-olds. We're just talking about kind of health and body autonomy. Also, feel free to throw any questions out whenever. Open to everything. So as they get older, 5 to 8 years old, depending on their body development, they might be starting to experience puberty. I know people are going through puberty much younger these days. So what may have been happening in middle school or even high school for some people is now happening in elementary school or middle school. This is a great time to talk about what is appropriate, what's not appropriate, hoping that they already have that understanding of their body parts, what their body parts are, and what's appropriate. So that, first of all, that no one should be touching their bodies. And especially in elementary school, this might be common learning, just what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. If they are touching a specific body part, are they touching their back? Are they touching their genitals? So knowing where people might be doing that will help kind of identify how we talk about it. Deciding and advocating for what is comfortable and uncomfortable. My favorite example, and I know this depends on the family, every family has their own kind of practices, own kind of culture around it. If they are not comfortable hugging, if they don't want to sit on that uncle's lap, like how are we letting them advocate for that? And if we are insisting that they go hug this person or sit with this person when they don't want to, what we might unintentionally be telling them is that their body is not their choice, kind of, that they don't have the control about who has access to their body. So as much as we'd love for our kids to be able to hug all the family members and feel comfortable with everybody, we also want to get them used to practicing how to say yes, how to say no, and that their no's would be listened to. So if they are saying no to something, that we respect that. Of course, right, like something like hugging a family member might be different than, no, I don't want to go to the doctor, right? This would also be kind of when the conversation around masturbation might become more appropriate. I think a lot of studies show that kids start masturbating even at a younger age, right? If they touch their body, it feels good. And we want to be careful not to shame that. As uncomfortable as we might feel around talking about it, we still want to let them know that it's normal, right? It's not shameful. It can be healthy for their bodies, but it should be done in private. This is not something that we do at school. This is not something that we do in front of family or in front of friends, at the grocery store, wherever it's happening. This is something that we do at home, maybe in the privacy of your own bedroom or something like that. Of course, that conversation also comes with, every family has their own cultural beliefs, religious beliefs around that. So this is just kind of where we're coming from research perspective. Again, no shame if this has never been a conversation that you've ever had, or even thought of. So happy to support you guys in all those ways. All right, middle school. I think this is middle school, right? End of elementary school, middle school.
Yeah.
Okay. This is when we should expect some puberty to be happening. If, young women are already starting to have like menstruation, they should probably know about that before it starts happening. I think I grew up with a fun, maybe not the right word, kind of funny story about a girl who like had never had the conversation around menstruation with her family. She goes to school, has her first period, is caught in the bathroom crying the whole day because she thought she was dying. You start bleeding out of somewhere. Oh Lord, I'm dying. So we never want anyone to feel like that. It's not a normal part. I think I also had a friend growing up, which at the time was pretty taboo for me. I never talked about menstruation with my dad or anything like that. My friend, when she got her first period, her dad was like, "Woo, you're becoming an adult." They took her out to dinner. They had like a little growing up party for her. I was like, at the time that was kooky to me. But, looking back at it, hindsight, that really took the shame out of it for her. And I think a little bit for her friends as well. I don't know if anyone else has any experiences with fun menstruation parties, but it was kind of sweet, So starting open conversations with them about their experiences, and they would probably want to hear about your experiences as well. So this might be uncomfortable for you, but letting them know what's normal to expect, maybe how it was different. I think acknowledging how everyone kind of grew up in a different time, that those differences are very real, because we can relate to them about a lot of things, right? Humans are humans, we have bodies, but our environment's changing, that our bodies might be changing at a different pace. Acknowledging that they can talk to us about what they're going through, and that we can listen and not judge them. And we might not have all the answers, but we're here to support them regardless. Oh, I love to hear that. I just saw that we did the same, celebrated the first menstruation. That's so cool. I didn't realize that was such a widespread thing. Very cool. Love to hear that. All right. Moving on. I know I might be like kind of speeding through this. Let's see. All right, here's the juicy part. My friends also laughed at me. I think Yvonne also laughed at me for calling this the juicy part. I think Ginny also laughed at me. Maybe juicy wasn't the right word, but it's eye-catching, isn't it? Or at least attention-catching. So now is kind of when we would start talking about sex and sexual intercourse and what that might look like, what it is. So like who might be involved, what body parts are involved. I think there's also opening up the conversation that it's not always just a penis and a vagina, that oral sex is considered sex, that, there's a wide range of sexual activities, that we still want them to be protected. I think there's always times in the year where students know that they should be using a condom for, penis vagina intercourse, but they had no clue that they should also be using a condom for oral sex, which is just as important, because STIs don't discriminate between body parts. So we want to make sure that they're protected regardless. How it's done, this might also be, right, this is the juicy part, like what that looks like, it should feel comfortable if that's happening, that it shouldn't feel pressured or anything like that, right? That's the consent part of this conversation. How it can lead to pregnancy. I think and if I want to also add a caveat, if you don't know all of these answers, right, to like what is all the possible ways to protect yourself versus all the possible ways that someone still could be pregnant, that's something that's totally okay for not everybody knows that. Not everybody's an expert in these things, but there's resources out there. You could always ask, school, like, happy to help. I'm always happy to answer any questions. I don't know everything. I feel like I've kind of brushed up on a lot the past couple of years. There's Planned Parenthood. They answer a lot of questions. They do a lot of education. And also your family doctor, any kind of MD, that you can definitely ask their pediatrician for these questions if you're not sure. I feel like I heard a lot of myths growing up about, if you have sex in this position and then you get off and do this after, then you can't get pregnant. Or if you're in a hot tub and there's a person 5 feet away, you could get pregnant. There's a lot of myths that as a teenager, you don't know how to decipher what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. So I think it'd be great that we're having these conversations with our kids, because they're going to hear a lot of misinformation. And so we need to be able to provide the correct information, maybe not only for them, maybe our children are not sexually active, but maybe their friends are, and our kids can share that correct information with their friends. Yeah, and again, this conversation can happen even before they're teenagers, because we know that they're kind of exposed to different things at an earlier age now. I think this is my final little star about what safe sex looks like. Again, having different kinds of protection. Yeah, using condoms is important for anyone with a penis. Even if there are 2 people with vaginas having sex, there's still different ways to use protection. I think I was given like a fun tutorial in college about how to turn a condom into a dental dam. And that was really interesting and inspiring, really. But just knowing that there's a lot of different ways to practice safe sex, and that it's always important, not just to avoid pregnancy, but to avoid sexually transmitted infections. Included in all this, if a sexually transmitted infection does occur, that it's not shameful, they're not dirty. Just like any other kind of illness or infection, like, the doctors can help. I think the phrase now is most things are curable, and if they're not curable, they're definitely treatable. So just kind of destigmatizing those things. All right. Ready? I think this is another question. Ooh, it is. Woo! A true or false question. Let me make it a little easy. True or false? Talking about sex with your with your child makes them more likely to act on it. So if you have those open conversations, they are more likely to engage in sex. Feel free to put your answer in the chat or even unmute yourself. I love talking to people. Dominique said false.
I agree with Dominique.
Nice. Yvonne said false. Good. Okay. Sounds good, everybody. Love it. I'm glad that we're all on the same page. The answer is false. Studies have shown that when parents talk with their children about sexuality, providing accurate information and sharing their own personal values, that their children are more likely to delay sexual intercourse and use protection when they do have sex. So I love to hear that. As much as I'm already having these conversations on a pretty regular basis, it's always a great reminder for me to know that I'm not pushing, this is not going to inspire them to do anything. Again, that they might have already have experienced this, or maybe their friends are experiencing this. Just really taking the shame out of it, because we want them to feel comfortable to talk to us. Not just to know what's happening with them, but so that we can keep them healthy, keep them safe, provide them with the correct information, etc. All right. I think everybody got that one right. All right, finally, we are at the teenager stage, the age of teenagers. So we kind of have already maybe had this conversation about sex, but if you haven't, there's no bad time to have this conversation. I think I forgot to say that in the beginning. There's no bad time to have this conversation. it probably will not be coming up organically. So if we're waiting for an organic into this conversation where our child's going to bring it up and we're going to have all the information ready for them at the time, it probably won't happen. So opening it up ourselves, there's no bad time. Teenagers. I love the eye roll. All right. So just want to hone in on this. They receive so much information from their friends, from media, like whatever they're learning on TikTok, whatever they're learning on Instagram, and just their lives around them, whatever they see out in the world when they go out with their friends, go out with family, they're still exposed to just life around us. Living in San Jose, this is a big city. There's a lot more people out and about. There's a lot more people doing different things than small suburb city and, random middle state. So we have kids who are exposed to a lot more things at a much earlier age. And we want to be ready for that conversation. If they don't learn it at home, they're definitely learning it in the world. I don't know if anyone else can relate to having these random myths that they learned in teenager or even middle school about what sexual acts were happening or what things were mislabeled, what kind of different protection is better, and how to get pregnant, how to not get pregnant. I love this
Jay has a comment. The only bad time is when they're in the middle of a video game. I know. I love that, Jay. I would say it's just a recommendation. To me, the best time to have these conversations is when you're driving somewhere and they're stuck in the car with you. That's a great time to have these conversations. So
I love that. Also, something is very therapeutic about looking forward where you don't have to make eye contact with someone.
Exactly.
They can look out the window. They could maybe even face away, but they, like you said, they're stuck. That's perfect. I know even some social workers who work at different schools, they'll have their chairs in their office kind of face opposite directions or even kind of parallels, because it really opens up a different conversation. Oh, I love this. That kissing can make a girl pregnant. I think I definitely heard that. I don't know who else has heard that, and there's no way, right? When we're growing up, we have no way to say that's right or wrong unless we know for sure, right? If that's the first time we're hearing about sex, it's possible. I don't know. All right. So I think this is another question. What percentage of people are having sex before they're 18 years old? I want to kind of gauge the room. What do we think? How many teenagers, even middle schoolers, will have sex before they're 18 years old? You could throw some percentages out. Jenny, do you know? I don't know if you
I have a guess, but oh good, VG said 60. All right, good. I was gonna say 60%, and I was like, am I gonna freak parents out by like throwing out this number?
Dominique also said 65.
I was gonna guess 40%.
Oh, interesting. Okay. 35, 15. I like it. 20. Above 55. This is kind of a big range. This is solid answers. Hopefully this won't be too scary, but it is somewhere in the middle. Oh, sorry, these were my suggestion. 15% of teens are sexually active by the age of 15. So let's say that's sometimes freshman or sophomore year. That's about 15% of teenagers. By the time they're 18, about 42 to 44% of people are gonna be sexually active. So hopefully this was, sorry, it kind of goes both ways. Some of you overestimated, so maybe there's some relief in that. Some of you were a little under, so hopefully it's not too stressful to hear that more people would be sexually active. And of course, this ranges, it's not a certain type of kid, it's not a certain type of any type of person who's having these experiences. I think we don't want to assume that it's not our person, right? It's not our child just because we think we know them or we know what they're doing. I love this. Every generation's a little more open, a little more fast and loose. And I think that, I don't know if I put this in the slides, but this definitely came up when I was kind of researching things for today, that this number has gone down each generation, this number has gone down a lot. And I think it coincides with the education. So the more people are talking about it, the more education they have in schools, the more education they're having with their families, the number of teens having sex like before 18 or before they're ready, definitely going down. Jenny, maybe you can answer this question. I don't know if I'm wrong. Is what part of sex ed is incorporated in like high school curriculum, if at all?
Well, Kayla, that's actually a very timely question. It's supposed to be taught sometime during high school. It's a state law. It used to be taught in freshman biology. And then the science standards changed with NGSS, and now science has to follow the NGSS standards. And the sex ed unit doesn't actually fit in to the science standards. So there's been this question now about where to do it for the past 2 years during the year of the pandemic. And I think even during this distance learning year, I don't think we did it at all. And I think the state gave us a waiver that we didn't have to do it because of everything that has been going on. Last year and this year, we're having to squeeze it in to the senior year. And during, actually, parents, if you're a parent of a senior, you're in the next couple of weeks going to get a letter from the district office about the sex ed units, because parents can opt out of it and opt their child out of it. So we are going to do it during the testing week where the juniors take the SBAC test. The seniors will do the sex ed modules. It's like an online course that we'll have them do. So it has to be taught during, that's a very long answer, Kayla.
I'm sorry. I didn't
No,
think
it's fine because it's actually one of these things that's like, oh my gosh, because it's a state law that has to be taught, but it's not. The state doesn't say it should be taught in this class and it should be
Right.
part of this curriculum. And so it's kind of up to the school district to figure it out. Our school district, it shouldn't be in the senior year. The senior year is actually way too late to teach teens this. It should, in my opinion, it should be in the freshman or maybe sophomore year, but it's kind of like figuring out where should it be. And so hopefully my hope is in the next year or two, the district actually changes it and we have a much better plan than what we've been doing.
Gotcha. Thank you. That was actually very informative. I'm sorry
Good.
give you the spotlight in such an intense way. But that is really helpful. Yeah, I think senior year, right, they're mostly already pretty well
especially in April of their senior year, right before they graduate. I mean, I guess it's better late than never.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was gonna say good before they go off into the world or into this, continued education or anything. But yeah. I'd be actually curious, this just popped up in my mind. I would be curious to kind of survey teenagers and see how many of them think like other teenagers are sexually active, because I know there is like a lot of talk, people expand the truth sometimes about what they've experienced. So I'm wondering, I don't know when we would do that or why I would do that, but I'm curious because I definitely remember in high school thinking that everybody had already experienced these things and everyone, like, of course I was a late bloomer and of course that was not the case. Is this another question? I love that I kind of don't remember my plot. Okay, no, this isn't. But I think I just wanted to give a couple bullet points, top 3 things that are important to remember. Asking them questions, right? They're not going to organically bring these things up. If they do, that's amazing. Most likely they won't. So kind of asking them direct questions, it's okay to ask them direct questions. Open-ended questions is always helpful. That's something me and Yvonne teach our peer counselors. If you ask them a yes or no question, they will definitely take that opportunity to give you a 1-word answer. So letting them kind of expand on some things if they're comfortable, of course. If they're uncomfortable, you don't need to push them. That might kind of drive them in the opposite direction. Letting them, talk to you about what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable talking about. If you kind of sense the hesitation, it's okay to like let off the gas. But if that is a situation, just reminding them, at the end of that, remind them that you're there for them, that you're there to ask questions or if they need help with anything. because guaranteed that'll like go a lot better than if we keep pushing them. So just reminding them that you're there for support. You have some answers, you have a lot of answers, maybe you don't have all the answers, but you know people who do. So you help them kind of along that way.
So one little tip I have is to actually watch some reality TV with your teenager. That way it's a hypothetical conversation about these people that are on TV, because oftentimes a lot of like healthy relationship issues and like consent issues will come up. And that's a great way to kind of like talk about these issues without like you like, what's going on with your life? And they're like, oh no, leave me alone.
I love that. I'm really
Oh, Gilmore Girls binge watching. That's great.
Oh.
And actually Gilmore Girls is actually a great, especially with issues of healthy relationships and consent, because if you've rewatched, when the Gilmore Girls was actually on, I was a huge fan. I loved it. But and I've rewatched it just a couple years ago. Some of the stuff doesn't hold up. Like you're kind of like, oh, that's a little cringy now. So it's actually a great show to use as a starting point for a lot of these conversations.
I love that. It's a great idea because there's so much on TV about what people are comfortable with, what they're not, whatever. I love that. I'm currently deep in a terrible show called Perfect Match. It's basically all the people who've been rejected from other reality TV shows paired together in a house, and they have to find their perfect romantic match. It's quite awful, so I'm not recommending it, but wink wink I am, because it's total garbage but fun to watch. A lot of different like healthy boundaries things. Oh, sorry, Yvonne.
Sex in it, so there's a lot of opportunity for conversation.
Yes, a lot about sex, a lot about relationship boundaries. I think another conversation just came up in the show where someone made out with their friend and one person was like, that's not okay with me. And the other person said, well, that's kind of how me and my friends are. So if you're not interested, then we can't be together. So a lot of good conversations come out of that show, whether they're positive experience or positive influences or not. That's a different conversation. All right, I'm gonna keep going. So kind of at the end of these, I always like to give like a to-do, like what should I be doing? Kayla Marshall, like what the heck should I be doing? Using the direct, clear communication is always great, even if it's uncomfortable. Asking the question and kind of seeing where it lands. I think you might be surprised. They might be more comfortable than you'd assume. Sometimes we put our own uncomfortable onto them, or our own discomfort onto them, so that we kind of want to hash that out. If they are more comfortable, then maybe they've been waiting for this conversation. Maybe their friends have had conversations with their family, or they know that school's, encouraging them to. So maybe they are hoping to have this with you. Tailoring your conversations to your child's age and maturity level. Of course, there's a lot of, teenagers who are ready for this conversation. There's also a lot of teenagers who are very far from this conversation, very far removed. They keep themselves away from this at school and social media. So they might be in a different place than other students. Excuse me. I kind of wish I spent a little more time on this, but explaining sexual abuse and encouraging them to talk to you about anything if it makes them uncomfortable. I think we kind of touched on it when we were talking about younger ages and what's okay, who's okay to touch your body, who's not okay. If it's in a doctor's office with a doctor and parents there, it's for your health. That's different than if it's someone at school, of course. So kind of explaining what's okay, what's not okay. And of course, if they're ever uncomfortable, to talk to you about it.
Yeah, I think it's important. And I think even the way we frame this conversation and talking about sex and consent, like in your mind, just link the two together. Like if you're going to talk about sex, you're also going to talk about consent.
Mm-hmm.
And just link the two together. I think that's really important.
Right.
Really quickly, one of the things I did not do with my kids is I was very open about sex. Reason why is because I learned about sex when I was 5 by my mom's friend's son. He told me all about it. That's how I learned. So I just assumed that could happen with my kids. One of the things I did not do is I was very consistent about talking to my boys about making sure girls offer consent. When my older son went off to college, he was under the influence and sexually assaulted by a female. Did not even cross my mind to have that conversation with him. So when we talked about it, we didn't really talk about it. It was very uncomfortable. And I wish I would have brought that up and normalized that for him, because it became a topic of like, I'm going to deal with it with my therapist. I don't want to talk to you about it, Mom. That was the end of it. Had it been something different that we had already talked about, I think he would have been a little bit more open. So I share that because I don't want, anybody to get caught up in that same situation of like, it didn't even dawn on me. So
yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's important. I think because we all carry our own, we all carry our own biases about this is, sexual assault, something that girls go through, not so much boys. And we want to like also this conversation spreads across everyone. Thank you for sharing that. I think the most recent statistic I saw, 1 in 4 girls experience it, but 1 in 6 boys experiencing it. So that's pretty close numbers compared to what I think maybe we might assume. So yeah, these conversations should be for anyone who's living in your house. Yeah.
Well, and I think also just how you have, like those of you that have daughters, I mean, I think we tend to have conversations with our daughters about, they giving their own consent and if somebody's not respecting like their boundaries and like what to do in that situation, but teaching them that they have to respect their partner's boundaries. I don't think that's something that we teach our daughters. And I think that's, thank you, Yvonne, for bringing that up, because I think that's a really important, just both ways and how we talk to our kids about this topic.
Fully agree. I think anything in this presentation, like young boys should be learning about menstruation, everything across the board. Everyone should know. All right. I just want to reiterate again, a lot of these things were brought up earlier, but sharing your own experiences with puberty, I think can be really helpful, right? How helpful is it to hear that maybe their parent never got the sex talk, and that's the important part, kind of gives you a little bit of leeway too, and sharing your own experiences.
I have to share really quickly it's kind of dumb, but I'm going to share. So my son has a girlfriend now, and when he goes to Target and buys her pads, and I pat myself on the back, because one of the things I always did with my kids, and it's so stupid, is when we'd be at Target and I needed to buy like a personal item, I would take it and I would throw it at them so they were forced to catch it. And they would be horrified and like so embarrassed. And I'm like, get used to it. One of these days you're gonna have to do this for your wife, like the whole thing. So the fact that my kid does that without even blinking, super proud mom moment.
I love that. We love him. I know, he's so sweet. Awesome. Okay, so continuing talking about safe sex practices. I don't know, do they know where to get protection if they are starting to have sex, or even if their friends are starting to have sex? Sometimes that's a good in. I know families are on the range of comfortable, uncomfortable with providing, protection for their children, but let's say they're not even sexually engaging as far as but maybe you could help out with their friends who are engaging with that. Offering resources to your child on puberty and on sex, even like books, websites, pamphlets. I actually heard there's a family at school who uses a journal to communicate between the two of them, which I think can be really helpful. There's a lot of conversations that are a little hard to have in person and, face to face, whether emotions come up, all these things come into play. So they'll share a journal. Let's say the child writes in it, like how they're feeling, any questions, they leave it. Maybe the parent responds the next day. The parent writes in the journal, kind of writes their response. And I thought that was a really helpful way to kind of take the pressure off that in-person conversation. All right. Lastly, encouraging them to ask you questions and process their reaction to this information. It's fair to acknowledge that this is not the most comfortable, but that you're still there at the end of the day for the questions. All right, this also comes with the don'ts. So I think we can kind of remove the slang for reproductive body parts. They do have different names, but it can be a little more confusing if everyone refers to things differently. We don't want to shame our children for like masturbating or being curious about their bodies. Again, like the shame might not even be intentional if we kind of are shocked, like, oh my God, what are you doing? That might feel a little scary for them to hear. And I'm sure they're not comfortable, you know. We don't want to discourage the children from asking any questions, because the more they ask, the better information they'll have. We also don't want to make up any answers, or if we, there's a lot of answers that we've heard growing up that we've kind of ingrained as truths. We want to make sure that those are pretty accurate, because we don't want to continue in the sharing of misinformation. So if you're unsure about their question, like looking up the answer together could be helpful. Like, I'm not sure, let's Google it. Let them know that you don't know. You can follow up with them. Maybe you want to ask the doctor, maybe you want to ask, another adult, anything like that. Your friends might know a little bit more. Again, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Also, don't be afraid to seek out information or guidance from, like I said, educator, healthcare provider, any other person like with reliable resources, because there's also a lot of bunk resources out there. Here's my information. I'm always worried when I do these parent talks that I'm like, I only have enough information to talk for 20 minutes. And then now I'm looking at the clock and I've talked like the whole time. So I'm glad that I didn't fail Miss Davis in having 20 minutes of talk. But here's my information. I added like a couple of resources that I used to create this presentation. If anybody wants this presentation, I'm happy to share it.
Yeah, I'll share it out when I send out the video.
Okay, perfect. Yes. My phone number, my email. Yes, that's all I got for you guys.
Any last minute questions from anybody? Thank you, Ms. Marshall. That was great. I know I told you like, hey, put together a presentation on this, and you were like, okay, but that was wonderful. So thank you.
Of course.
So hopefully parents, this is if you haven't had the talk yet, the sex and consent talk, you're inspired to have it. If you have had it, I encourage you to keep having it, because it's not a one-time thing. Just keep talking, because I think the more you normalize this conversation and have, and Yvonne can probably share this also, having a 20-year-old child and her being really comfortable to coming to me about relationship and advice and stuff that she's going through about sex and all of that. It's actually really nice. I love that I have that relationship with her, but you got to do the groundwork in their teen years so that they are comfortable with having it. I mean, again, to be honest, like I think I was pregnant with my daughter with like the first time I had talked about sex with my mom. And I was 30. So that's not great. So I hope you don't have that relationship with your child.
I still haven't talked about it with my mom. Maybe when I was giving birth, I said
exactly. Like, I mean, I was like in labor. My mom was in the hospital room with me. She obviously knew I'd had sex, but we've never talked about it. So thank you, parents. I hope you enjoyed this. I will send out the presentation with the resources so that you have that. And then next week, we're actually going to talk about what's normal teenage behavior and what's more worrisome teenage behavior. So there's a lot of things that teens do that I'm like, yeah, that's normal. Even though it may seem super alarming to you, and that doesn't, just because it's normal doesn't mean it's easy to deal with as a parent. So, but that's what we're going to talk about next week. Okay. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful week. Stay dry. We're about to get a ton of rain over the next couple of days. So stay dry. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.